classified professionals. Well, just good morning to be in community with all of the classified professional colleagues. And today is an introduction to cultural humility. And it's going to be a very, very packed time together. We'll be done at in about an hour and a half, 11:30. And it's hard to push all the, squeeze all the content of cultural humility in 1.5 hours. But it's going to be basically an overview. And my hope is that you learn more. But my name is Tony Santa Ana. My pronouns are Shia, he, his, and himself. And these slides were adapted from Dr. Melanie Turvalon and Dr. Veronica Kiefer Lewis, who are the cultural humility experts that I learned from. So I want to just thank them and give them props. All right. So, and before we start, I want to do a land acknowledgement, and I am on the land of Muwekma Ohlone tribe. And we do this land acknowledgement to ask for permission to the original stewards of this land and ask them for permission that we are here, that we acknowledge you, and that you are continuing the stewardship of the land that helps us breathe life into our existence. And I also want to say that they are still thriving and they're around. So it's not something in the past. They're still with us. And then we can't just do a land acknowledgement just for the sake of doing one, but we also got to stand in solidarity with them. So then we fight for our communities that have been marginalized, oppressed because of colonization and settler colonialism. So thank you very much, that tribe. And I want to give some time and acknowledgement to the Black Lives Matter movement. I know at your school that racial equity and racial justice is important. And I just want to name that one of the reasons why we're actually doing a lot of this work right now in this moment is because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would acknowledge that there's so many different types of Black lives that matter. And so you can see them there, from trans to men to working class to immigrant to disabled to poor. And that this Black Lives Matter movement really sparked this new social and civil rights movement of our time. So I want to thank them for that. And also, I also want to just spend a little bit of just a moment to honor those lives that have been lost from police brutality and police sanctioned violence. So I just want a quick moment for them. Thank you. And then also, I want to spend a little bit of time that you're seeing on the news in Atlanta. The gunman shot and killed these people these names on the screen, and that there has been anti-Asian hate increasing in the last year, over 4,000 incidents that happen, and that is documented from Stop AAPI Hate website, and majority of them are elders. And I just want to just a moment of silence for these people who have lost their lives from senseless acts of violence and white supremacy. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time that we just think of them and honor them. Thank you. Hmm. And also, I just want to recognize and honor that along with the Black Lives Matter movement, along with the land acknowledgement, the women, the 6 Asian women, and the other people who have died from the Atlanta shootings, that we are still living in a pandemic. That it's been over a year. You still have children who are being homeschooled at home, or they're about to transition to go back to school. You still are taking care of people, maybe elderly, maybe furry animals in your life, and maybe even yourself. You're thinking like, oh, I have to return, quote unquote, return back to school. What does that mean in terms of our emotional well-being? What does that mean for our safety? What does that mean for our students? So I just want to acknowledge that we're also still in a pandemic with all the other things that happen. So please take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves as we do this work, because it's very important that this work of equity is not just about outward facing, but it's inward facing, and cultural humility will talk about that. And here's our agenda flow for today. Welcome and mindfulness, which we kind of did, preparing our hearts and minds. We're going to be doing a name stories activity to deepen our community. We're going to have some shared language. What is culture? What does that mean for you? I'm going to share a video with you about the history of cultural humility from the founders, Dr. Melanie Turvalon and Dr. Jan Murray Garcia. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 cultural humility principles, and then we'll do an activity of principles in action. And then at the end, we'll do closing, Q&A, and appreciation, and we're going to try to do that all in an hour and a half. I'll do my best. But I really like doing workshops that are very engaging and interactive. I lecture, but I try not to lecture as much. I really want to have interactivity as much as possible with the participants in the Zoom session. So I really encourage that. You can do emojis, you can write in the chat. If you have a question, just please write in the chat or just let me know so then we can answer it. But I'm very much about pausing as well. And here are some workshop learning goals. By the end of this workshops, you'll be able to define cultural humility, articulate the difference between culturally competent and cultural humility. You'll identify 4 principles, the 4 core principles, and then at the end, we'll practice a culturally humble self-reflection and a client engagement. And I'll be using the word client because cultural humility was actually born from the health area. And so they use the word client. But in our, and so if you see me and hear me use the word client, it's just because I'm using it and referring to how they defined it. But when we think of clients, we think about our colleagues and when we think about our students. So I just want to say that, okay? And then here are our learning agreements. No blaming, shaming, or no victimization. Confidentiality, if stories are shared, please ask for permission because we're going to be in breakout rooms. Please just be respectful of the confidentiality. Courage to interrupt if something is going amiss or being left unsaid. Like if something is happening in your body and you feel like that's not landing right for me, and being able to ask a question, ask a clarifying question. Voices, thoughts, ideas, experiences are welcome. Pay attention to what moves you. And then use oops and ouch to stay in the dialogue. If something doesn't sit well with you, check in with yourself. What does that mean? What does that mean for you as a classified professional? Why is that not landing well? Are you thinking about something? Is it triggering a past experience or a moment you had or a conversation you had? And then here are the learning expectations. Listen with your whole being. Listen to learn, right? This idea of listening to learn, not listening in a sense where, okay, you're listening, but then you're thinking about this email you got to write or this person you didn't have a meeting with, but just listen with your entire being and being present. Being fully present, attentive to oneself and others. Share what you can. You have a choice and say in the learning process. This is our learning space. I'm not just the facilitator and you're the participant. We are learning together. Not everything will be covered. So stay open to outcome, not wed to it. So that means in my workshops, we do it Allied Path. If something is resonating for folks and we need to take time to stop and pause, we will do so. Because that's the work of equity, is we need to slow down and pause, because oftentimes what we're tasked to do is we always have to have a goal, we always have to meet something, but the work of cultural humility and equity is we need to pause and slow down. And the last one is we're all perfectly imperfect, that we are all here, we all make mistakes, we're all learning, and we're doing it as a community. So that's important as we do this together. So building connections. Humility requires deep connections. All right. So right now, I want to get a little bit of engagement. Can everybody just put your name in the chat and your position at the campus so we know who's in the room? So we just know we're building connections just right now. And please check the chat so you know who's in the room with you. Great. Estela, I remember you. Good morning. We got Denise, Christine, Drew, Aaron, Fariba. We have Sarah, Joan, Christina, Linda, great. Ingrid, Layla, Saman, I hope I said that right. Johnny, John, Gail. Right. Great, keep it coming. Great. So we have a lot of Ednas in the room. Paige, nice. Madeline, Fernando, great, great. We have lots of different types of people from different areas. Diana, Denise, great. Some of these names look familiar to me, so thank you for coming back. I hope I did something well last time. Carrie, all right, great. So please have them come in. Cindy, great. So our first activity, I'm going to model this for you, and you're going to be in a group of 3 or yeah, group of 3. You know what, Aaron, do you mind if we do it a pair? Is that okay if we do pairs, Aaron? All right, so I'm going to model this for you, and we're going to be doing something called name stories. And what is in a name? You know, this is where I want you to think and reflect on what your name is. And I'm going to model this. So my name is Anthony Abolencia Santa Ana, okay? And first off, those are my parents, and that's my father. He just turned 79 last weekend, and that's my mom. My father's name is Jose Santa Ana Salataria Santa Ana, and my mother's name is Alicia Abolencia Santa Ana. And how did I get my name? Anthony actually was the name of my grandfather that I never met because he died when my dad was 8 years old. So many people say that Antonio was his name, that he's around me spiritually, you know, for folks who believe in that, he's around me spiritually. And Abolencia is the maiden name of my mother, Abolencia. And that sounds like a very Malaysian, Indonesian name. Because in the Philippines, there were Malaysians and Indonesians who were in the Philippines at the time because of the center of where the Philippines is at. And then my last name is Santa Ana. And for those who are wondering, why are Filipinx names Spanish? And the reason for that is because the Spanish colonized the Philippines for over 300 years, from the 1500s to the 1800s. And then the story is, the way they identified certain areas of the Philippines was by last name. So the person who was a Spaniard said, this is my area, and this is Santa Ana area. So when the old timers ask, where are you from? They say, what's your last name? They'll say Santa Ana. Oh, you're from this area. So they already kind of know. And so that is the context of my name, named after my grandfather, Santa Ana from the Spanish, and Abolencia is Indonesian. And so there's a famous literary Filipino writer. Her name is Jessica Hagedorn. And she said that the Philippines is like a cultural mosaic because of so many different influences in the Philippines, a very interesting place. And so that's the meaning of my name. And so that's a little bit about me. And I identify as Filipinx American because I was born in America, but my parents are from the Philippines. So now what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna do our name stories. And I'm sorry, we're gonna do it to a pair. In a pair, please share one of the following things about your name, or many of these. These are just guided questions. These are menu of questions. What is the story of your first and middle last name? Who gave you your name and why? What is the ethnic origin of your name? What are your nicknames, if any, and do you like them? And what do you prefer to be called? I prefer to be called Tony. So no worries if you call me Anthony or Tony, it's okay. So let me put this in the chat for all of you so then you can have it. And then Aaron is gonna put you in your breakout rooms. So let me make sure I do that. Right. So those are the instructions in chat. And Aaron now is going to put you in a pair for about 7 minutes. So make sure that both of the people are able to talk, and you don't need to answer all the questions. These are just questions, are guiding questions. You can decide what you want to answer, but really just about community building with you and your partner. All right. And so some people are like, who goes first? Partner A is first, and partner A is the closest to January 1st, not the year, just the month and date. Okay, January 1st, that's partner A, whoever's closest to that. And then after that, partner B will go. All right, so about 7 minutes. Please make sure that you give space for both people to talk. So Aaron's gonna put you in now. All you have to do is accept the invitation to breakout room, and I'll see you back in about 7 minutes.
Perfect. Thank
you. Well, welcome back, everybody. And I hope you had a good time with your colleague that you may have never met, and you learned more about them. So if you can put in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself about what you heard, about your partner, that'd be great. So if anybody can put in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, it's really up to you. Anybody would like to go? I'm also an instructor, so I can wait 7 seconds, no problem.
Okay, yeah, let me start you here, because
Hi, Fariba, I remember you.
hi, Tony, how are you?
Good, I remember you.
I got to learn about, we talked about Germans in Germany and the German language, because that's where my counterpart was. She's a first generation, and that's where her grandparents were from, or her parents. And it was super interesting. We had a really nice talk, and we got it was really interesting, and I love doing it. So
great.
thank you.
Yeah, and is this something you knew about your partner before?
No, but her name sounded Germanic, so I had always thought kinda. But you don't know until you start talking about it, and it's somebody I've worked with for 10 years, and it's nice to learn these things, and because you don't think of people being first generation, because I'm not. I mean, I'm the first one in America, so, but I always think that it's just me, and everybody else has been here their whole life, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, those little things, it's nice to know. It's just fun.
Yeah. And this work of equity and cultural humility, I mean, this is a very great conversation started. Tell me about your name, not only from your colleagues but students, and they actually feel like, wow, this person really cares about who I am. They want to know more about me. It's something easy to do, and I hope you're able to do it with your other colleagues and students. So thank you, Fariba.
That's what I was gonna say. It's such a shame we can't all sit down and do this all together.
well, we'll create some space. I'll ask Aaron and Cyrus if the professional development team would just do it on just this. I think it'd be a good idea.
I am on there, so I should be talking about it.
Okay, all right, Fariba, thank you.
Thank
and I want
you.
Of course, and I want to uplift Cindy. Said both of our names have Greek origins and our last names are Spanish. Well, that's very interesting. Cindy, did you want to explain a little bit more? Or are you good? No pressure. I'm just wanting to see if you wanted to.
Sure. So my last name is Ordaz, which, like I said, and Enriquez is also Spanish, but our first names, have Greek origins. My name obviously is a diminutive of Cynthia, which is Greek. And so like we shared that, as well as some nicknames. But I think like Fariba was saying, I think I really appreciate that, just knowing a little bit more about somebody that you work with is valuable.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. Thanks for that. Really interesting. Greek origins, but have Spanish last names. That's really interesting. Other folks who want to unmute themselves or put in the chat. Okay, no problem. We'll continue. We're going to have more breakout rooms. And so this is something that we do in terms of cultural humility and equity, is really understanding who our colleagues and our students are. And there's been studies about pronouncing people's names properly in terms of how they want their names to be. And it's interesting when I talk to my students and I actually say their name and I pronounce it in the way they want me to pronounce it, something lights up for them. They really feel like, wow, I'm feeling validated. I feel important. I feel like this person cares about who I am because they're pronouncing my names right. Especially like, instructors and as classified professionals, we're on the front lines. So I know you can't remember every single person's name, but if you ask them about their names and if you have a little bit of time, I think that would be very, very important. Yes, Joan, that is so important. Agreed. I appreciate that. All right, let me continue on. And so we just did the name stories. Let me go to the next piece. Okay, and so I'm going to just briefly talk about what cultural identities and culture is, very briefly. Understanding culture in terms of cultural humility, right? These cultural group identities could mean many things. Oftentimes people associate culture just with like race, ethnicity, of those things. But cultural group identities means many things. It could mean your spiritual religious identity, your age and your ability status, your gender and your sexual orientation, your professional and special interests. If you're into sports, you're an artist, you're a musician, your educational status, your political party, your social circumstance, like whether or not you're housed or you were previously incarcerated or you're a veteran or something that has to do with something that happened in your life, your socioeconomic status, the SES, or your geographic location, your health status, your family status, married, divorced, parent, blended family, and so on. And so that is all that really encompasses, not all of these, but many of these encompass culture. What is our culture, right? And so I want us to think a little bit larger about what culture means, not just race, ethnic, and ethnicity. Those are a part of it, but these are more encapsulating and more encompassing of that. But this is not the exhaustive list. This is part of it. So however you identify in terms of culturally, your different identifications, even intersectionality is important as well. You can be a queer, Black, first generation college student. That's really important to you. That's your culture. And so those things matter. And so as we do this work of culture, I want us to think of, before we get into this pair share, I want us to think a little bit more about what is culture, right? It is the shared systems of values and beliefs, right? In terms of people. It is my world lens of how I think about the world, right? It is the learned patterns of behavior you get from your parents, from your grandparents, from your cousins, your relatives, this behavior that creates this culture in your family and in your home. And it's ever changing and socially framed. What that means is identity and culture is not always permanent. It's fluid sometimes. It changes over time. Some things will happen. The Filipino community is different from what my parents grew up in the Philippines. So it's ever changing and it's different depending on context. It's your expressed in views, your attitudes, and your behaviors. So all of those things make up your entire culture. How you think, how you behave, the way you react to people, the way you react to even yourself in the decisions you make. And then sometimes referred to in categories, like culture isn't a category, but oftentimes I think culture is encapsulating of all these different things I mentioned in the beginning. And then culture is individually defined. And what do I mean by that is, and I'll just give an example, is that I'm a Filipinx American, but I cannot represent all Filipinx Americans because my experience is my experience alone. I might have a shared experience with people that live geographically around me, but that doesn't mean that my experience is the representation of everybody's experience in terms of Filipinx American. So we also need to recognize that as well. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put you in another pair group. And we're going to, if it's okay, Aaron, we'll put them in threes, if that's okay. All right. And we are going to do this. Let me put this in our chat. I'll put this in the chat. Okay. The instructions in the chat. Let me make sure. Okay. There's the instructions in the chat. All right. So in your group of three, how do you describe your cultural background? You know, depending on what we talked about. You know, I talked about your race, your ethnic, your national and cultural identities, and all those other aspects of your identity in terms of your culture. Please share that. How do you describe that for you? What is resonating for you? What's important for you? What do you want people to know about you, right? And then how does your cultural background influence your work with others, your human service philosophy, because we're all classified professionals. We are service oriented. We work with students, we work with our colleagues. And then your approach to social justice, anti-oppression, or anti-bias work, the work of equity, the work of social justice, the work of DEI work. So how does your cultural background influence that? So you have basically two things, and this is a conversation. You don't have to answer every single question, but it just basically is, first, how do you describe your cultural background? And then how does that influence all aspects of your being, your work, your personal life? How does that influence all of those things? And we're gonna put you in three, and it's a conversation just about those two specific things, cultural background, and how does that influence all the other aspects of your life. All right, and it's in the chat. I put the instructions in the chat, and Aaron is gonna put you now in another group of three, randomized. So you're not gonna be in the same group. You're gonna be able to meet other people. And this will be for about 10 minutes, all right, 10 minutes. We'll give you a longer amount because you have three people. All right, so please accept, and thank you, Aaron, for doing that.
No problem. I'm gonna stop the recording here.
All right, great. Welcome back. Welcome back. How was that session for everybody? You can either unmute or you can put in the chat. It's okay. I'll uplift both. All right. John said, great. All right, great. John,
Can't
did you
be
want to?
serious, people? Come on.
I don't want to force anybody, but I see Paige unmuting. Paige, would you like to go? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I love these sessions. I've done a few with Allied Path, and I really, really enjoy getting to know more about the people I work with. I mean, it might be people that I've been in a million meetings with, or see frequently, and it's just so nice to get these little personal tidbits and understand what somebody's name means to them, or what their background means to them, or where they came from. I really, really love it, and I'm all about like seeing the humanity in each other. And I feel like so often we just go through our day and it's like meeting to meeting to meeting, and we don't stop to remember like, oh yeah, these are people who have struggles and complications and backgrounds, and it's lovely.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And definitely Allied Path is very much about that. And, when we think about the work of equity and cultural humility it's about the relationships. It's foundational, because some people go, just tell me how to do equity. But within the work of equity, it's about doing it in community. And I always say, if you have a lot of trust, if you have community building, you actually can accelerate the work of equity, because you have those trust and relationships that you can actually do the work together. So thank you very much, Paige, and I appreciate what you're saying. And I know Drew said, good session, enjoyed learning and bonding. Saman said, really substantive, real connected with my room. Cindy said, second that. Did Drew or Saman or Cindy, did you want to say anything more than what you put in the chat?
I just want to say, walking into it, I thought here, three people in my group, we all seem to come from very, very different walks of life. And it didn't take long for us to tell each other stories and realize, there was a certain sentiment that we all held at certain time in our life, coming, whether it was adapting to or not quite identifying with our given or, chosen culture, and instead kind of embracing a different one, and having, or being judged for our culture, not necessarily being Persian enough, or being Honduran enough, or being Black enough. We all kind of shared that similar experience.
Thank you. Yes, and like I was saying earlier, is like, identity and culture shifts and it changes, and it's not just always permanent. It always can transform depending on what's happening in the world and how people are being in the world. Especially right now, as we know, we had to abruptly shift to online in matters of like days, and for some folks, matters of a day. And so we had to definitely shift the way we work, the way we operate with our families, and so on. So it's changing. So thank you for Saman, did I say your name correctly? I just want to make sure I pronounce that correctly. Yes? Okay, thank you, Saman. Sarah
I
said,
want to add a little something. We also figured out that this multiculturality we have is amazing for our students. We have students that come from far, that are not with their parents or their families. And when they can hear their own language spoken, or tidbits of their culture coming through, I think it makes them less homesick. I think it makes them feel more that like they're in a community that understands them. And I think it helps them a lot. I have students I speak Persian to, I have students I speak French to, and I can see in their faces that relaxation all of a sudden of thinking, oh my God, there's somebody from my home here, or or somebody who's going to understand when I speak, or and I think that multiculturality is important for our students at SMC.
no, that's so true. Like, when students feel connected to the campus, they'll come back. They'll say, this is my home, or I feel really good about talking to my instructors or talking to the classified professionals. And that connection will actually help them through what they're doing in school, with their academics, with their social life. And so that's important. Just to getting to know them just a little bit could go a long way. So thank you, Fariba. I appreciate that. So we're going to move on now, because I only have about 40 minutes left, and we haven't get to the content yet, but I want to share this video about what cultural humility is before we actually start. Okay, let me make sure I share the sound, optimize video clip. and I'll make sure here, put this on. Right, here we go.
One word to describe cultural humility for me is love, actually.
If I had to encapsulate cultural humility, the whole concepts of cultural humility, it doesn't do it justice, but the word that I think of it is essence.
Escuchar.
Being.
You.
Opening.
Receive. Compassion.
Love.
The principles of cultural humility offer one more framework to contribute to what has got to be our ultimate goal, yes? Our ultimate goal is that there will be a sense of equity, a sense of equality, and a kind of respect that we are driving forward.
Cultural humility is a multi-dimensional concept, and certainly Melanie Tervalon and I conceptualized 3 dimensions.
The first is lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. And in that critical self-reflection, it is the understanding of how each of us, every single one of us, is a complicated, multidimensional human being. Each of us comes with our own histories and stories, our heritage, our point of view. You're looking at me now. I am very fair-skinned. When I was a little girl, my hair was blonde. My eyes are blue. People often tried to call me anything but African American. I have a history. My identity is rooted in that history. My parents gave me the knowledge of my own social identity, and my own experience in life has created that. I get to say who I am.
The second tenet, after self-reflection and ongoing lifelong learning and development, is this notion that we must mitigate the power imbalances, to recognize and mitigate the power imbalances that are inherent often in our clinician patient or clinician client or service provider community dynamics.
And then finally, the piece that I would offer that Jan and I feel people often either don't read or don't like, which is, and the institution has to model these principles as well.
Okay, those 2 people were the actual founders of Cultural Humility, and they're from the health profession, Dr. Melanie Tervalon and Dr. Jan Murray Garcia. And you saw it in Oakland, and so that's where they actually created the conception of cultural humility. And I'll continue to share my screen and give you some more context about cultural humility, okay? So, like again, this is Dr. Melanie Tervalon, Dr. Jan Murray Garcia. It's them. And the film, not the film, but the clip that I showed you on YouTube, there's a longer version. I just wanted to show you a shorter version. So if you want to go on YouTube and just type in cultural humility and their names, you'll probably see the longer version of it if you want to learn more about that. And cultural humility, Leland Brown said this: not a discrete endpoint, but a commitment and an active engagement in a lifelong process that individuals enter in an ongoing basis with patients, communities, colleagues, and with themselves. And what resonates for me here is this idea of not a discrete endpoint. It's not about stopping. It's not about one thing you learn and you're done. It's about continuously critical self-reflection and continuous learning, okay? And these are the principles they mentioned. They mentioned 3, but I'll mention a 4th one. The cultural humility principles are: 1 is a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation, reflection, and self-critique. It's ongoing, right? developing mutually beneficial partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals and defined populations, partnering with those you serve. And I want to highlight that. It's partnering with those you serve, meaning that getting to know who your quote unquote clients are, who your students are, who your colleagues are, so you know how to be in service to them. And then the third one is redressing the power imbalances in the practitioner partner, client provider, educator student dynamic, really flattening the power out. So we see each other as equals. I know you have positional powers, but if you flatten it out and able to see each other's humanity, something will shift within that relationship. And then last one, and Dr. Melanie Turvalon, she actually touched upon it, is advocating for and maintaining institutional consistency. This is the ideal of modeling. What is the institution's commitment and what is their sustainability and consistency to make sure that we are actually practicing the work of cultural humility and cultural humility as a pathway to equity, right? And what I'll do now is I'm gonna go through each one of the principles, but before I do that, I wanna share this piece, which is, I think, a very powerful image. It is cultural competence versus cultural humility. Many of you probably heard of this idea of cultural competence, but cultural competence is an endpoint, right? There's an endpoint, ability to arrive at a competence. Cultural humility says there's no endpoint, there's ongoing learning. And cultural competence is outward facing. We're learning about those people over there. Cultural humility says we're actually learning about ourselves too. We're honoring who we are. We're honoring our identities, our culture, so we can learn about other people and respect and value other people. The other one is about, it's not addressing power and privilege. Cultural competence doesn't address power and privilege. In cultural humility, we talk about power and privilege so we can flatten out those power imbalances. Cultural competence doesn't address institutional responsibility. It places the responsibility on the practitioner, the person who's actually taking the cultural competence workshop. We're the ones who have to do the work, but we have to see it from an institutional level as well, the culture of the institution. And cultural humility talks about community-based care and advocacy. It's very much about the servant leadership model, the servant leadership in terms of our communities and so on. And then cultural competency says it has a set of beliefs, practices, assumptions, and protocols upheld in cross-cultural settings. And what that means is, for example, I went to a cultural competent workshop and I'm learning about, say, Filipinos, because that's what I am. And it says, this is what Filipinos are, this is what they do, this is what they eat. And I'm done with that 2-hour workshop. And so therefore, I think I know everything about what it means to be Filipino, right? Actually, that is not the case for cultural humility, is that there's the complexity and the multi-dimensional parts of identities and individuals that we need to understand. Yes, you may be a Filipino, I went to a cultural competence workshop, but there's also complexity in the person who actually identifies as that, right? And so I see cultural competency as this. You go to a workshop, for example, you're learning Spanish. You go to a cultural competence Spanish workshop and you think that you're gonna be able to speak Spanish in 2 hours. You're not. Cultural humility says, I went to the workshop for 2 hours. I was thinking I was gonna learn Spanish in 2 hours, but actually it told me, because I'm reflecting, that I actually need to learn more. I need to practice more. I need to understand more about Spanish culture, not just the language, to understand all the intricacies and the complexities of that culture, right? And so it's an ongoing type of learning, right? And then I'm gonna go through each principle a little bit more. Again, principle 1, a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, right? Looking at yourself in the mirror. And so this self-reflection piece really is about your intrapersonal reflections, knowing who you are, knowing your history, knowing your experiences and your worldview. So therefore you can engage in self-reflection and dialogue with other people, with people who have different cultures and different ways of being in terms of their identities and their culture. So it's this understanding that we know who we are and we're understanding who we are and self-reflecting. So therefore we can understand others. And some questions you can ask yourself in real time when you're thinking about other groups is, what do I think about this cultural group? How do I know this to be true? What are my biases around this culture or this group or these individuals? What are they based on? What are the consequences in my relationship that this person, this community, I act on these biases? How is those biases influencing and impacting my behavior? What can I learn here? And what are my responsibilities? So these are some questions of self-reflection you can do when you come across folks that are different from you, that you can think about how I can be self-reflective, and how does that impact the way I am in the world with other people. Principle 2, developing mutual beneficial partnerships, learning from each other's cultural differences and finding common ground. And Paige was talking about understanding our humanities and listening to our humanities. I love that, Paige. So I wanted to share this piece, developing mutual beneficial partnerships, right? And the client focus, and we have to see the client or the student or our colleague as an expert, right? That they have something to offer, that they have their truth is their truth, and they come with that cultural experience, right? We have to avoid the checklist of cultural traits, that these are the check marks of what it means to be Filipinx, right? But we have to practice respectful, curious inquiry, motivational inquiry, encouraging about curiosity and listening to their person's story, anticipating that the multiple cultural identities a person has, the complexity of this individual, and what you can work on. So really understanding each other's point of view, the way of being, and their cultural identity, and creating a mutual beneficial partnership. So therefore, what does that mean for our students? Is if we understand our students, we understand who they are, we understand that individually, we can better serve them and we can better serve our colleagues. And then this idea of community-based care and advocacy. Listen as if the speaker is wise. They have something to really offer to us. Listen as we are in the idea of learning with each other, respecting and defining our priorities, our health priorities, building on our strengths, a very strength-based model, and act as if students are partners with our community, that we're in partnership together, that we do things together as a community. And then cultural humility principle 3, it's this idea of redressing power imbalances, that we have to challenge our power imbalance and demonstrate humility. What does that mean? Individual or community as a rich expert, teacher on the content of culture, isms, that our students, our colleagues come with truths. They're experts of their own lived experience. And we see them as that they're just not empty vessels. They're actually people who have these lived experience. And like our students, I know that our students come with so much wisdom. Some of them are first generation, some of them are veterans, some of them have to travel 2 hours away to come to school, that they are the cultural expert of their own lived experience. And a practitioner as a student, as a partner and a facilitator with access to resources, knowledges, that this person comes with so much richness in their lives that we can learn from. And then we determine access to resources, knowledge, and services in the best interest of the individual. What does that mean in terms of being equitable for that student? What does this actual student need? What does the colleague need so we can help better their situation and then we can provide resources and support? And then cultural humility 4 is we're talking about principle 4, advocating for and maintaining institutional consistency. And so you see this model, an Allied Path model, and the work we do is we actually start from the individual. We go from the individual to the interpersonal, and then we go to the interpersonal institutional, and then society, and then we go to the societal and cultural. So all these are factors in how we did the work of cultural humility as a pathway to equity, right? And so this is important in terms of consistency for change work, right? So cultural humility requires institutions to be self-reflective, to honor the wisdom and partnerships of those who we're serving, and it challenges systems of oppression, right? There's inequities in our systems. How do we challenge those and advocate for transformational change? And we have to talk about what are those power and privileges that ensure everyone, and people think equity is only for those people. Actually, equity, if we have an equitized institution, it actually affects everybody and it helps everybody. And everyone is treated with equity, justice, and fairness, because equity is synonymous with justice and fairness. So institutional consistency means is that how is the institution being practicing cultural humility? What are the inequities that we see and how are we changing those things? That the institution needs to model those things, so then the constituency groups also are seeing that as an example, so we can follow that lead. So it has to be institutionally consistent on the work of cultural humility. And so here's some things, institutions and cultural humility. Consider this as a public review of your client or your student or colleague's experience. humble and courageous self-reflection, like we're saying, lifelong commitment to that, dialoguing with the community and hear their input as experts, having community conversations with your students and your colleagues to really understand what is the needs and what's happening in their work areas. Work with power imbalance by distributing the knowledge and decision-making often and freely. Can we have a shared leadership model? Can we have transparency in communication? Could the classified professionals be at the table to help make those big decisions for the institution? Because classified professionals are a huge part of the work we do for equity. And then how do we create communities of dialogue to work with community members and clients and students and colleagues on each other for tough issues? Maybe the professional development committee could create spaces of community dialogues to understand what is happening right now as we're shifting, quote unquote, back to school plan, right? What does that mean for the classified professionals? And so what would it look like to integrate cultural humility in your work, right? It could look like this. It could be done by reducing power differentials between employee and students, really seeing each other as equal, seeing each other as you have richness in your culture, richness in your expertise, you have lived experience. It can be done by emphasizing students' strengths. So we really are coming from a strength-based approach that we uplift their strengths, like they're doing something well, how do we uplift that? And it can be done by reframing the relationship as cooperative and co-learning. So we're cooperating and we're co-learning together. We're doing this as a community. So that's how cultural humility can actually look like in terms of the work at our institution and even your jobs. Okay. And I'll do a quick review of this. Lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, principle one. Principle two is redressing the power imbalances in the learner education leadership relationship. So flattening that power. 3, developing mutual beneficial partnerships. So learning in community, being in community, seeing each other as vessels of learning and knowledge. And then number 4, principle 4 is advocating for and maintaining institutional consistency. That's a very important one for me because the work of the institution needs to also be reflective in how we can advance the work of equity. And then this is cultural humility as a pathway to equity as we work. And so that was a really not rough, but that was a very quick overview and brief of the 4 principles of cultural humility. And I'm going to stop there. And before we get into an activity, but I just want to stop there and pause. If people have questions or they have any comments that I would like to answer or I can uplift. So if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. I'm going to stop share so we can see each other. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything you wanted clarification on? Well, that's my daughter saying hi to you if you hear her in the background. No? Any comments? Okay, no worries. I'll keep it moving. We're gonna do our last activity as we close. And let me do this. And Erin's gonna help us with this. And we're gonna put you in a breakout group for about 8 minutes or so. In your breakout group, and let me put this in the chat for all of you. Make sure I put this in the chat. She wants to join too, that's why she's screaming. All right, there you go. That's the instructions are in the chat. And so in your breakout group, you'll have a dialogue about these questions. One way that I can recognize and develop cultural humility in myself is to, what are you gonna do in terms of recognizing, developing this idea of cultural humility in yourself? Second one is one time that I witnessed, experienced genuine cultural humility was, and you can explain your experience. And then the last one is cultural humility can directly benefit students, my colleagues, and me because how do you think cultural humility can directly benefit yourself and all these other people? All right, so the direction in the chat, and we'll give you about, I want to say about 8 minutes or 9 minutes. Erin's gonna put you in a randomized group again, And then you have these discussion about this, a dialogue about this, and we'll come back. We'll do a quick share out, and then we'll do a wrap up, and then we'll be on with our day. So enjoy your last breakout session. Thank you, Aaron.
Perfect. Thank you. So let me get this set up.
All right. I'm gonna just make sure. Is everybody back now? Is everybody back now, Aaron? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So we're coming to a close, and this is our time. How was that session with your colleagues in the last session? Anybody? And I invite people who haven't spoken to invite you to speak if you like. You can do it on chat, or you can unmute yourself. It's up to you. Anybody would like to go and share?
Sure, I will.
Please go ahead and tell us your name so we know who you are.
I'm Denise, and I met Sarah, and we realized our breakout room was probably about 10 hours too short because we have some commonalities in, and we were talking about a very specific and nuanced frame of cultural humility within the deaf and hard of hearing population, because we both have connections to that field and that culture and that language. So we began to discuss that avenue and just realized our breakout room's going to end, and we just didn't have enough time. So it was very amazing. It was an amazing discussion.
Great. Denise, tell me who your partner was.
Sarah Beth.
Okay, Sarah Beth, great. Well, I hope you got each other's emails. If you want to have, when it gets back to campus, you can have some lunch together and continue the conversation. So
honestly, I really hope so. It was really great, especially talking about like cultural humility, because we oftentimes really, think about it in terms of race. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, it's like in terms of a language that is very, very, very unseen. We see the language barrier with students who come from, our international students, we see it very clearly, but with their students from down the street who are deaf, like we could go on forever about how to teach English and literature and writing to students who are visually language. And so we could go on forever. I love it. I can't wait for the plague to be over and for us to connect on campus.
Yeah, I hear you. And for sure when it's safe, I think that's the most important piece. But I'm glad that we're seeing culture as not just race and ethnicity. I think that's a big part of it, but also there's so many different facets of culture. And cultural humility talks about that. When we saw the video, Dr. Melanie Turvalon was saying, we're complex, multi-dimensional beings, that there's so many different intersections of who we are. So I just want to thank you very much, Denise and Sarah Beth, for that. I see Joan. Joan, would you like to unmute yourself? Go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Oh, sure. I think it's also just in terms of how to address it, or what I've seen is not to assume anything, not to place emphasis on like stereotypes and biases and things like that. Because even when I think about like gender, you automatically you think, oh, that person looks like a female, they're a female, right? They want to be called he, a, she, but that may not be the case. Or I think about you can't identify someone's preference in terms of sexuality and so forth, or assume things. So it's in addressing cultural humility, I think it's also just not assuming anything and just asking, right? Asking it's like asking the person's name and how to pronounce it. It'll make them feel a little bit more welcome and appreciated and understood that you're trying to get to know them.
No, I appreciate that, Joan, for saying that. And and asking is important, right? Some people want to be respectful of in terms of asking. What I would say is don't be abruptly and say, tell me your gender, right? I think that is jarring and can be disrespectful.
Definitely shocking.
Right? And so I want people to think, if you want to be approached about how your gender, your ethnic, your religion, is being curious, just saying, I really don't know this, but I'm really curious about this. Do you mind if you have a conversation? And then if you have that trust and relationship, great, you can have that conversation. But just coming up to someone you don't know and says, tell me your gender, I think could actually blow up in your face. So I really want you to be mindful of that. And so thank you, Joan, for really uplifting that to really staying curious and really listening to people and don't assume. So thank you, Joan. Appreciate that. All right, any last ones before we close? Any last ones? Okay, I see something in the chat. Let's uplift that. Write their names on it. Yep. Sarah Beth said, one of the professors I work with have students write their names on a note card with the preferred gender pronouns, and other get to know information. Great. I like to do that. That's a great way. You see on my naming of my name here on my screen, it says Tony Santana, and it has my pronouns, just for folks to know that I'm aware of that, and this is my pronouns I use. Some people put in their email signature as well, or when people introduce themselves, they say, my name is Tony, my pronouns are. So you can do that to really, it shows that you're aware of what's happening. You're also aware of people's pronouns, and that you did some homework, and you're actually respectful of that. So that's important for folks. All right, as we're wrapping up, I know this was quick and this was very brief, and I hope you continue to learn about cultural humility. It's a beautiful, beautiful model. We do this using cultural humility as a pathway to equity. And please continue to learn about it. Please continue to watch videos, read some more information, learn, read up on the Dr. Melanie Trevelyan, Dr. Jan-Marie Garcia, and continue to take some workshops on it. I think it's gonna be a great model and way of being, actually. So my last thing I wanna do is I want you to put one or two things, at least one, about appreciation, a challenge, a question, or aha moment during our session. Please put it in the chat. Like, what was those things? Appreciation for colleagues, appreciation for content, appreciation for Erin for helping me with the breakout rooms. Any appreciations or questions or aha moments, please put it in the chat right now so I can uplift that. And then I'll say thank you. Paige said, I appreciate everyone's presence here. All right, thank you, Paige. Acknowledging everybody that attended. From what I heard from Cyrus and Aaron, this is a well-attended workshop, so I'm glad for that. Edna said, appreciate seeing attempt to define culture. Great. Fariba said, learning about other viewpoints. Yes. Diana, appreciation for this workshop. I appreciate you for coming. John said, appreciate for willing to guide us along a path to greater equity. This was a great session. I appreciate that, John. Joan said, appreciate everyone's continued interest in learning about cultural humility. Please continue to learn. Denise, pretty to share and learn from all colleagues. Yes, I love doing the breakout rooms. You can learn about each other. Madeline said, I appreciate the group sessions, incredible people. Carrie, learning that culture has many definitions. Yep. Saman said, thank you for your contributions today. Self-improvement, we strive for cultural humility. Enjoyed the workshop. Thank you, Sarah Beth. Focusing on cultural humility. Drew said, learning the variety of ways you can learn about the variety of human experience. Yes, the diversity and the power and the beautiful of our human experience. And Aaron, appreciate for having Tony bless us with his knowledge. Always working with y'all, of course. Important workshop to us. Love the moments allow us to connect and learn about from each other. Great. Well, you're also going to have a session tomorrow with another one of our Allied Path colleagues, and he's going to be talking about authentic communication, which is another strategy tool that you can use as you do this work of equity. Cindy said, appreciate the colleagues and all the tools that we're providing. Yes. Carrie said, mabuhay, Tony, salamat, salamat din. Thank you, Carrie, appreciate that. Bring in the culture and Tagalog and Filipino. But with that, I want to say thank you again for all of you for participating, staying with us for the last hour and a half. I hope you continue to learn and advocate for equity as classified professionals. Like I said, I'm very clear about affirming classified professionals. You are leaders on this campus in terms of the equity work. We are essential to the work. So don't forget that as I continue to do this work across the institutions I serve and I consult with. But thank you very much. Have a great day, and hopefully see you in another workshop. So I appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Tony. If everybody can just give Tony a round of applause for continuously coming back to help us and definitely offering these workshops. Like he mentioned, we do have a workshop tomorrow with one of his colleagues, Justin Campbell, if I'm not mistaken, Tony, who's going to be doing a workshop at 12 o'clock. So if you guys haven't signed up for that, please definitely sign up for that. And thank you guys for being here and sharing this space with us. And go sign up for some more workshops. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. This was, as usual, amazing. You always have the most amazing workshops. I love these. I really do.
Thank you I appreciate that.
Engaged.
that brings a light to my day today. So I appreciate
Oh my
it.
God, you have no idea. At least, I mean, we're all so zoomed out.
Mhm.